Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's NASC Preferred Supplier webinar, From Concept to Claim, a guide to launching new ingredients for companion animals. I'm Bill Parker with NASC, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items. First of all, the session is being recorded for you, and you can refer back to it for others who could not attend today. It'll be posted on the NASC website at nasc.cc/webinars. We will be addressing your questions at the end of today's presentation. However, you're welcome to type them in at any time using the Zoom Q&A tool. You may also communicate directly with me via the Zoom chat tool. And finally, if you have any technical difficulties, your best bet is to log out of the webinar, close all your browsers, reopen a new browser, and log back into the webinar using the same link you used to log in initially. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our presenters. First, we have Margita Zwenka, DVM, DABT. She's Director of Preclinical and Companion Animal Services, registered veterinarian for almost 25 years. She's a board certified toxicologist. She has experience as a study director conducting GLP compliant studies for the pharmaceutical, biopharmaceutical, and nutraceutical industries. She's managed a large CCAC compliant university animal facility. She's experienced with GRAS and NDIN dossier development, and she is an expert panel member. Next, we have Susan Hewling. She's PhD. Director of Scientific Affairs, Structure Function Claim Substantiation. She's a professor at Central Michigan University. PhD in Nutrition, MS in Exercise Physiology, BS in Nutrition from Florida State University. She's been in higher education for over 18 years at Central Michigan University currently, University of Central Florida College of Medicine, Stetson University, where she was tenured, and she's an author and medical writer. Thank you both very much for presenting today. And with that, I will turn it over first to Susan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. And I want to thank everyone for being here today with Margita and I. And we're happy to speak to you about this and to introduce you to Nutrisource if you're not familiar. And for those of you who are not familiar, Nutrisource is a proud member of NASC. And I'd like to tell you, just to get started, a little bit about what we do, because it's relevant to what we're talking about today. So we are an independent contract research organization, a CRO, and we help clients with their products from concept to claim. So no matter where you are in your product development, from idea to market, we can help you every step of the way and figure out exactly what you need to get to where you want to go. Next slide. So we are full service, as I mentioned. We do clinical trials in both animals and humans, and we have relationships with research facilities for whatever species you're targeting. And we are full service regulatory agency in multiple markets, US, Canada, etc. And we also have full service bioanalytical and full service analytical. If you'd like more information about any of the services we offer, please visit our website, and we'll be providing emails at the end, and you can always reach out to us. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean by developing a product from concept to claim. Sounds kind of catchy, but what exactly does it mean? Well, we're going to walk you through those steps and give you a little bit of an example today, and something that probably many people have worked with or are familiar with. So the very first step is we sit down with the client and we want to talk to you exactly what your goals are. And in that conversation, what we're going to address are the following, like, who is your market and what do we know about that market? Of course, we may be working with a client that has worked with the particular target market for a really long time and they know it really well. Or it may be like, well, we're kind of just dipping our toes in a new market and we're not really sure. Great. Well, then we know that we need to really dig in and help to understand exactly who that target audience is. What are the trends? Who are they? What are their buying practices? What are they looking for? And we can look at a lot of marketing research for that. You know, who are they? What's the culture surrounding that? And then from there, we can dig a little bit more into the science. So if a client comes to us and says, for example, we would like to do a mobility, like joint health product. Not really sure, we're thinking multi-ingredient. We really are considering CBD, but we're a little cautious around CBD because we understand there's a lot of hesitancy. There's not a lot of clarification in both science and regulatory, so we're not really sure what's there. So maybe we want to also look at some ingredients for that joint health product that are tried and true and well known. And we're maybe considering glucosamine. Okay, great. We're going to look at what the science says. We want to look at what direction you want to go with it. What is it? Do we want to look for, we're going to look for a product in elderly? Are we going to look for competitive dogs? Are we looking at cats? What species are we targeting? And what do you want to say about it? Do you want to say it helps keep your elderly pet, going faster, longer, keeping up with the pups, that kind of thing? And what science do we need? So these are all questions that we're really going to start circulating around the idea and find out exactly where you are. Next slide. So let's just start with a little bit of an example here. So we'll stick with our joint health idea and we'll say, okay, let's look at our market. Here's our target market. So I had a little fun with this. I'm not going to lie. I am a pet lover. I have a 501c3 animal rescue. So I'm sorry, I got on Instagram. I couldn't help myself. So when I was looking at the market research, I thought, okay, what sells and what gets out there? And I Googled, who is the #1 dog of Instagram? There we have him. It's Jif Palm. And Jif Palm has 9.8 million Instagram followers. He sells video games. He sells sweaters, beds, dog treats, you name it. And you think, okay, well, now we're looking at our market. We're looking at what sells. What is it that people who have companion animals are looking for? Well, you can never go wrong with cute, can you? So we're looking at what our market is, what they're looking for, what they're interested in. But we also want to look at market analysis. So I found a Global Newswire news release where they did research that indicated that the global veterinary dietary supplement market is anticipated to grow by $3.2 billion by 2028. It's probably not a huge surprise to anybody here. The market's expected to expand at a very lucrative growth rate in the time frame in the near future. And what's driving this? So this is important too, right? Because if we want to make sure we understand our target, what's driving it? Well, of course, animals, just like people, are living longer, and therefore more chronic conditions are coming to the forefront of things that pet owners and veterinarians are trying to address. This makes total sense. And our joint health example fits into that. So it makes a lot. The other thing that's a huge trend right now is also no surprise, and that's the growth in the e-commerce. A lot of that, of course, connected to the pandemic and more people online, more people working from home, and all these things. Next slide. So when we think about Jif Palm and we think about our target audience, I mean, yes, we have a companion animal product, but who we're really selling to are the humans. They're the ones with the checkbooks and the credit cards at the end of the day. And it's interesting, I think, always that the indications that we are developing for the pets mirror the situation of humans. And I think that COVID-19 has made that more obvious perhaps than we ever realized before. It kind of, yeah, that makes sense, of course, but it really has kind of slapped us in the face. One example I found when I was looking into it is from an owner of a canine mask company, and actually makes surgical masks for pets. He said, we had 300% sale increase in Amazon during COVID-19. So people were buying masks for their pets to take them out to the dog parks and things like this. And we project our experiences on pets. This is like, it sounds like common sense, but it's important, I think, to really dig in and understand. And the pandemic is an excellent example of that. And I think what supports that is the fact that what the market analysis showed was that the conditions where we saw specific supplements being sold was in stress reducing, immune supporting, and calming. Well, that's very similar to what we saw in the human market. So several things kind of tell us, well, okay, that's what humans were taking for themselves because everyone was, experiencing that. Or also, humans were home a lot more with their pets and probably stressing their pets out, right? And that's what people were seeing. And also, of course, the pandemic catalyzed this transition from brick to mortar to e-commerce channels, which also helps us, again, looking at our market. Next slide. So then if we just sort of narrow it down a little bit and we say, okay, we're going to look at this joint health product and we're going to see it really is one of the top sellers. In 2020, it took almost 22% of the market, second really only to multi-minerals and multivitamins. And what we know about the CBD, of course, is lots of growth in that market and it's expected to grow a lot more. And so in this example, we think, okay, so if our client is expressing to us that they're a little hesitant to really dive into the CBD product and make any claims off of it. So what they want to do is they want to go with a tried and true ingredient in the joint health space. And that's where the glucosamine came in. And so a big trend in the market right now is putting CBD in a product, but not really making any hard claims off of it because it kind of speaks for itself. But then having tried and true ingredients with lots of efficacy and safety to kind of carry the claims. And so this is another trend, and this is kind of what we'll follow. That's why we set this example up to be like that. So we'll kind of start surrounding our story in this particular example. And then we want to say, all right, so if we're going to do this multi-ingredient product in the joint health space, we're going to, in our example, we're targeting dogs. So we know that species. And then we said, well, what form are we thinking about putting it in? So I went back to our market analysis and I was like, oh, I wonder what the popular forms are for supplements for dogs and cats. And what I found with the dogs is that gummies and chewables took the largest revenue share. And powders are expected to grow more. And I was like, gummies for dogs? Like I hadn't thought about it. And then I thought, well, I did say that it mirrors the human experience. And that's what we're seeing in humans. And then I had this visual of my dogs in like a bag of gummy bears. And I was like, oh my gosh, what, dogs are eating gummy bears? But then I looked, I'm like, what do dog gummy bears look like? And that's where I found that picture. So maybe a little different than the little tiny bears I was visualizing, but nonetheless. Next slide. Okay, so now we have a little bit of idea of our market, our form, kind of whatever. And the reason why we wanted to get a lot of that straight before we went to the science is because in the science, what we need to find is we need to find supportive evidence that is identical to what we're looking at in our product. In other words, we want it to be for the same species. We want it to be in a similar form. We want to have obviously the same ingredients. And if it's a multi-ingredient, who knows? Maybe there's some science out there with these two ingredients combined. Typically in multi-ingredients, that's not the case. Typically what we'll do is go into the literature and look for each individual ingredient, but just kind of throwing that out there. So the first thing we'll say is there a plausible mechanism of action? In other words, is there a plausible biological mechanism by which this ingredient could potentially do what we think, what we're trying to say it does? In other words, could this support joint health? Could glucosamine, chondroitin support joint health? Does it make sense that it does from a mechanism of action? Well, yeah. Glucosamine and chondroitin are commonly recommended. So we see that, okay, they are common in the marketplace. They're recommended. They have a history of use, maybe not like some of ancient herbal type medications or indications do, but they do have a history in dogs and humans and other species. And glucosamine regulates the synthesis of collagen in cartilage and may provide mild anti-inflammatory effects, while chondroitin sulfate inhibits destructive enzymes in joint fluid and cartilage. So they work in a supportive, synergistic manner. And the two ingredients also contribute to the synthesis of glycoaminoglycans and proteoglycans, which are building blocks for the formation of cartilage. So we find this out when we dig into the literature. Next slide. And then once we have a plausible mechanism of action, we want to look at what's out there for efficacy. Now, I just gave you 2 examples here. And what we're going to look for is we're going to look for systematic reviews and meta-analyses, and then we're going to look for individual studies. We want to look at the study design. Was it done in the right species, for the right indication, in the same form of the ingredient that we're going to use? And we go through the literature. An example of what we might find here, there's 2 here. So here's 2 studies. Well designed. We will look at what methods they use. And a lot of times what we might look for here when we're talking about companion animals as opposed to humans is we might look for, okay, is there a human subjective way of measuring success here? Because we don't, that's who we're selling the product to, right? Did the owners or did we have investigators or veterinarians that assessed improvement beyond just the cytokines or biomarkers? Because sometimes if we're using colony dogs, we may not have pet owners per se, but at least some sort of human subjective thing would be something to assess.
Susan, you're
Sorry, I got muted there, sorry. So now we've started to paint the picture and we're going to put forth a recommendation. We want to say, okay, what potential claims can we make? And we want to look at, when we come up with what potential claims we want to make, that's science driven, of course, and it's also regulatory driven. And it's not the purpose of this talk to go into regulatory, but I certainly don't want to leave it out entirely either, because it does determine what claims we can make. And what supported dose in our target species can we do? And in this case, I kind of gave a recommended dose. Now, the thing about dose that I want to make sure I point out is that oftentimes it's not like we can give an exact number. We have to give a range. And we're hoping it's not a wide range, and that's going to vary by ingredient. But we want to have some idea of what's efficacious and what can be supported for marketing claims. Next slide. And so now we know what gaps, what are we missing? Is there anything we're missing? And we can start to fill in the gaps. The lit review and the science really is our backbone of everything. It's giving us what weaknesses we have in the area that we're targeting, what strengths we have. It can help us determine our formula, what we're going to say about it in the market, how we're going to put together our marketing material, our website, everything. And so the science helps to drive all the things we're going to say about it, from our substantiation document, our website material, white papers, everything. And it also helps direct any research we're going to do about our product. And in a multi-ingredient product, it really is most ideal to have research, since we're really only looking at each ingredient separately. Next slide. So now we have a place to start. We know what the product is, what category we want. We have an idea of dosing. We have an idea of what's known about the product historically, literature, in the lay literature. We know who it's for, what it potentially does. We need to know where it's going to be made. These are some things that we can now start to decide where we want to sell it. And we have to look not just at efficacy, but we have to look at safety. And part of that, of course, is good manufacturing and quality and how it's made. So we really have this framework starting to develop nicely for our product. Next slide. And the big question is, that's guiding all of this is what we want to say about it. And that's what we mean when we say from concept to claim. So you have an idea, we have what we want to say about it, which is our big question, and the science is what links us all the way through. And if your approach is that we're going to let the science drive the decisions, and of course with the regulatory in the background guiding us very strictly there, then you can't go wrong. And regardless of the indication, the species, what you're trying to do, if we're letting science drive it, and we're also identifying the gaps that may not be in the literature, and then therefore what studies need to be done, we know we're going in the right place. Next slide. And part of that, of course, when I say knowing what you want to say, the big question, I don't want to leave out knowing what kind of claim you have. I've talked thus far mostly about structure function claims. I said joint support, joint health, supports healthy joints, etc. But I don't want to ignore the fact that those aren't the only kind of claims you can make. There are other claims that can be made, and health claims. You can make ingredient inclusion, nutrient content claims. And these are other things to consider in our big question. And I just want to make sure that I'm very clear that that also gets factored into our big plan. Next slide. So now where we are is if we are conducting research and we've identified the gaps that exist whereby we may need to do research, and certainly with something like CBD, we may need to do some safety research, we may need to do some efficacy research, but now it's research with a purpose. And that's ideal because, of course, it's the best use of time and money. It gives us a clear idea where we are, where we're going, what we want to do. It helps us develop clear research questions. And we certainly don't want to just dive right in and start conducting a study because it's expensive. We want to make sure that when we do design a study, it's very clear what our research questions are and that we got to our research questions by a very science-directed process. And that's where, I kind of led you, hopefully, to this place, is that we have a nice study design and a clear flow and an understanding of why we're doing the research and how that research is going to be conducted. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Margetta. Margetta, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, so to build on what Susan's been sort of guiding you towards, when you're planning out what information you need, again, the sort of key message is to remember what's your goal for this ingredient. Some other questions are, how much experience do you have? Are you new to this process? Have you done it lots of times before? And then there's some specific ingredients that Susan's gone over, but for your ingredient, what form do you want to take to market? What species are you targeting? There's always some similarities across species, but there's some significant differences that have to be considered. What life stage are you targeting? Are you targeting multiple life stages? And then, how do you want to dose this? Is it something that you're intending that they should take for the whole life stage, intermittently? What's your goal? So if we talk about your ingredient, it's always important, again, to come back to what information do you already have? This helps us determine what we need to do. But generally, we like to suggest starting with the manufacturing process. It's important to remember that if you don't have your manufacturing process well developed, you may need to think about how many studies you want to do before you get that manufacturing process down pat. Because sometimes if you make major changes to that manufacturing process, that can impact your ingredient enough that you may have to repeat some of those studies. So you really want to take that into consideration before you jump in and start studies. With very few exceptions, the ingredient needs to be manufactured under CGMP. And then it's really important to look at the raw materials you're using as well as any processing aids. These also need to be very well characterized and be appropriate for use in animal feed. If, just as a side note, if your ingredient's a fermentation product, there's a few additional things that you need to consider and think about. For example, is the production organism you use grass? Is there bioengineering involved? And details like that. Those will need to be well developed as well. Then we get to specifications. These are really important to be well defined for your ingredient. So including some identity specifications, but it's also important to consider some of these impurities that there may be, and that the levels that you set for your impurities, that they lead to a safe level when an animal consumes that at your intended use level. So some common impurities that we see in specifications are heavy metals, lead, arsenic, cadmium, mercury are just some examples. Microbial contamination is always important as well. Depending on your ingredient, but total plate count, we see yeast, molds, total coliforms, maybe salmonella, etc. But then there's also some impurities that may be added from your raw ingredients or your manufacturing process, right? These may be pesticides, mycotoxins, processing aid residues, and things like that. So those are important to consider as well. The other thing you have to remember is that the methods that you use to analyze your ingredients need to be identified and validated as well. So if we bring in our case study here, So the client is going to be using glucosamine, which is well established, but we're given that they might be using CBD from a hemp extract, which is a botanical extract. There's a few things that we need to consider. So farming practices come in, harvesting practices, storage conditions of the raw material, any pesticides that are used in the growing conditions. All of those need to be taken into consideration, as well as when they set identity specifications, there's going to be some natural variation that needs to be taken into account. So that's important to not have your specifications so tight that you can't use or you're outside of that with some of that natural variation. So moving on to safety. Here again, it's really important to know where you want to be, your end goal, and have that clear in your mind. So again, what's your dose? What's your target dose? What are you hoping to be able to put out there? The frequency, is this something that is going to be ingested every day? Is it going to be taken intermittently for a period of time? And then, is it going to be included in a balanced diet? Is it going to be a treat or chew? And then what information do you already have available on your ingredient? So when it comes to planning out your safety, there's no one path that's right for all ingredients. Like there's no checklist that anybody can supply for your ingredient. It really is very dependent on a number of things, and how you ensure the safety of your ingredient and your target species, again, is usually very very dependent on a number of things. Is this a brand new ingredient, as in there's no information out there at all? Is there something similar already out there that maybe you can piggyback some information from? Do you have it available in a different species already and you're just moving to a new species? Is it available in humans? Just because it's available in humans doesn't mean that it naturally translates to being safe in animals. But generally, there's a lot of that information that you use to be able to get it to show that it's safe in humans can be used to help support the information in companion animals. Life stage is also very important. What life stage are you targeting? Because the requirements can be considerably different depending on that life stage. And then laboratory rodent data. We know we have a really good system for taking laboratory rodent data and translating it to humans. That's not as well developed, translating it to companion animals, but it's still useful information. It doesn't stop the need to have your information, your safety information in your target species, but it's definitely supportive information that can be used. So just covering three sort of examples of what kinds of studies you can conduct in your target species. So those being like feeding trials, efficacy trials, and safety studies. For all of these, there's some common initial things that you should think about. These include, again, what claim do you want to make? In the end, what species are you interested in, or is it multiple species? And then again, just to reiterate, what life stage, how do you want to dose that? And the other important thing to consider is, do you have any other goals for the future? So in this case, you may be focused on dogs right now, but adult dogs, but do you want to consider adult cats later down the road? Do you want to consider geriatric dogs down the road? Those sorts of, that sort of information can also help us design some of these studies and sort of lay out a plan if we know that up front. So feeding trials, they're generally sort of used to address nutritional adequacy and safety. There is some standard AFCO methodology that you can use for these types of trials. The example I have up here is for an adult maintenance diet. They're generally conducted in colony animals, so a very controlled environment. There's a set number of animals that you should have in the trial, usually with a concurrent group of control animals that are sort of balanced for size and breed. Sometimes you can get away with historical control data, but generally there's a concurrent control group in there as well. The test diet is the only thing these animals have access to for the full 26 weeks of the study. And then there's sort of a minimum set of endpoints that are included in the basic protocol. Physical exams by a veterinarian at the start and end of the study. Daily food intake is recorded. Blood collection's done for a very minimal set of parameters in the trial. And then there's sort of the requirement, no animals can die or be removed from the study for nutritional reasons, and animals may not lose more than 50% of body weight. So you do have the option of making some changes to the standard methodology that helps guide, so you can get more information based on your ingredients. For example, you can add additional clinical pathology endpoints to the minimal ones required. You can add on some urinalysis. And you can lengthen the study. You can't shorten it, but you can lengthen. You can add a few weeks if there's a reason to do that. And it really is based on your requirements, what you need from the study. Efficacy trials, again, there's some standard methodologies that are usually built in, but there's a lot of flexibility based on those. And those are, again, I know we keep coming back to that, but they're based on your goals, your claims, a decision if you need a disease model, or can you use healthy animals? And then there's, do you want to do this in colony animals? Again, very controlled environment, very standardized, what they have access to, how it's done. Or do you want to do this in client-owned animals, where it's a lot less control of what happens, but maybe a more realistic setting for the outcome, for the efficacy of your product. You need to consider how long the study needs to be to show efficacy of your product. Again, that's very product dependent. And what kind of trial design? There's different trial designs we can do. Which one would be best for your product? And then there's a variety of efficacy endpoints. Some of them can be very specific and very unique. So before you add any of the really specialized endpoints, you want to be sure that the data you're going to get at the end is actually going to give you what you're hoping it will give you. So sometimes they sound really good, but you just really need to evaluate what you're going to get out there. And then other studies. Safety studies, the traditional one, the traditional OECD 409 study that you do for pharmaceuticals is not required, but you do, design safety studies that are sort of based on some common methodology are important. And then really targeting what endpoints you're looking for and other details of the study around your ingredient, what you're trying to get out of it, what goal, how you're going to use it, your plans for the future. And then you can also do proof of concept studies. So one other aspect I want to talk about is the need to conduct these studies GLP, or good laboratory practice compliant. Some companion animal studies will be conducted under good clinical practice, or GCP, which I'm not going to cover today, but there's some differences between GLP and GCP, but on a very basic level, both of them help ensure the quality and integrity of the data that you get from your study. So the very important thing to consider when you're thinking about the need to be GLP compliant is that once you've started a study, you can't go back and make it GLP compliant. You need to start it GLP compliant or not. So GLP is a quality system. It takes into account some organizational processes, documentation for non-clinical studies. The relevant regulations are in the US, it's usually 21 CFR Part 58. And outside of the US, in Europe and stuff, it's often OECD, the principles of good laboratory practice. If you're unsure which one to use, a lot of CROs can help you with that. They can be in compliance with both, but it's a conversation you're going to have with your regulatory advisor and your CRO, and they can help you decide if you need to have both. So what's involved with conducting a study under GLP? In a very basic sense, it just makes sure that the CRO has the organizational structure for conducting the study that you want, that they have the sufficient resources, that they have the trained personnel, they have the equipment, and they have the capacity and capability to do that study. And they have the appropriate procedures in place to document all of that. So the study records from a GLP study should allow for the accurate reconstruction of the entire study from start to finish. For an example, when I was a study director and we had staff complaining about all the documentation and how rigorous that documentation had to be, I give them the example that I should be able to show a sponsor or a regulator, I should be able to show them the study documentation, show them exactly which staff member took a blood sample on any given day, how much blood was collected, that staff member was fully trained in that method of blood collection on the day that they took the sample, that there was an approved standard operating procedure in place, and that staff member had been signed off on that active version, that the blood tube that we used that day was not expired, that it was actually adequate to be used, how that blood was stored between collection and before it got to the lab for analysis, and then that the anesthetic machine that we used to anesthetize that rat for blood collection was actually serviced appropriately for that day. And this should all be for a study that we conducted 5 years ago, right? So that you've long forgotten what you do, but when you take out those records, you can follow everything all the way through. What GLP does not do is it doesn't do anything with the science per se. So you're not going to find in the GLP regulations, you're not going to find how many animals to include in a group. or what clinical chemistry parameters to analyze. That's not GLP. That's not the intent of it. So some of the benefits, why is it important, besides the fact that sometimes it's required, you don't have a choice, is the integrity of your data. You can be in a GLP compliant study, you can rely on the integrity of the data and the documentation. And there is some benefit that even if there's not a requirement to conduct your study under GLP, is to place that in a CRO that's familiar with GLP or does the compliance, because most CROs don't have a completely separate set of instruments or instrumentation or staff. So you have the benefit of the well-trained, well-maintained equipment when you're placing that study in that CRO. So if we get back to our case study, so our client, again, wants to develop a product. It's a combination of a well-known ingredient, glucosamine, and then a not so well-known or well-researched ingredient, which is CBD from a hemp extract. They want to target dogs with mobility issues. And as Susan said, there's lots of information on the literature on the glucosamine chondroitin part, but we have some significant gaps in the knowledge base and the literature in the safety of CBD extracts in dogs. So our client's looking to probably provide this ingredient in a treat form, but they have not yet fully developed their manufacturing process. So we have a really clear understanding of our client's goals and where they want to go. And so we've made, we have a few recommendations to make. So again, just like Susan, I want to caution, we're going through this case study, not taking into account any of the regulatory things that you need. But again, it is definitely an integral part that has to be from the beginning. You have to have regulatory advice and be thinking about the regulatory considerations as you move through this entire process. So first of all, we're going to tell our client that they need to clarify their manufacturing process for this ingredient. They're going to need their specifications for the raw materials. They're going to need specifications for their material. They're going to need to conduct some safety studies for their target species, in this case dogs, because there just currently isn't enough information on CBD containing hemp extracts alone. However, on the combination product, we need to do some safety studies for sure. They would like to conduct some efficacy studies. However, we would recommend that they do, we can design and monitor them, but maybe a little further down the road. Let's get the manufacturing and that sort of stuff organized first. And as they move forward, given that they're not yet ready to finalize their manufacturing process, we recommend that they keep evaluating the literature, that evaluation continues, see what new information is out there. And that just helps guide to identify some safety concerns that may be around that we need to build into some of those studies that they do. So as a quick aside, so what would be very valuable for our client is the recently announced NASC sponsored safety study from CBD containing extracts. We provide some very valuable information that our client could use. So, if they're not at that point when that study is published or is finalized, that would be very helpful information for them. So as a wrap up on the final slide, it's the who, what, when, where, how questions. They're really critical in, like Susan said, connecting the marketing and where you want to go through the science part so that you actually get to where you want to be. Thorough literature reviews are key. Find out what information is available out there already. And then sometimes knowing what you should not do is just as important as knowing what you should do. And then seeking some expert consultation is always an advantage. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you both for that. We're going to go ahead and get over to the question and answer session. I'll go ahead and start with one question that we had. Just a moment here. For a company coming in cold, what time frame should they allow to get an ingredient into the marketplace?
Hi, Bill, and that's an excellent question. It's one we get very often, and I wish I had a concrete answer for you. I think patience is definitely the key. We will provide a realistic time frame with the understanding that things can come up along the way, but the answer becomes very dependent upon the desired ingredients. And again, looking at the science and what's already been done and what needs to be done, is really the key into determining the time frame.
Okay, and then to follow up with that one, is there a difference in the time allowed between human and animal?
Not really. And as we mentioned, we will all look at the human data sometimes for some ingredients. The real difference between the human and animal becomes in the regulatory, right? Because, obviously they're under different regulatory environments and restrictions and bodies that will make decisions. But as far as the science goes and the process that Margetta and I outlined today, there really aren't significant differences.
Okay, thank you. Another question here. What are your main considerations when helping a client select excipients for an oral veterinary drug or supplement product?
I'll let Margetta answer that one.
So I guess, there's a lot of what ifs and dependent on that, but an important part is whether they're safe to use or they're already approved for use in animal feed would be a consideration. And that's probably the key one as you go through. I don't know if did I miss a part of that or?
And you're speaking to excipient selection, Margetta?
Sorry, yeah, the excipient selection. So yeah, selecting ones that have, that have a robust set of data set would be helpful already to be able to use.
Excellent, thank you. When you have a human ingredient with studies on effect and safety, how much study do you then need for a species?
So
go ahead, Margetta.
Oh, sorry. So generally you should expect that you need safety information on your target species. So information on human information that was used to get it to humans, like laboratory rodent data, is always helpful, and it helps us build some background and helps us design the studies. But target animal safety studies are usually required. Like they are definitely something that you need to expect to have to do.
Thank you. And then you were speaking earlier about endpoints and the guidelines of the endpoints. If you have a subject in a study that falls outside of those endpoints, are they then excluded from the study?
It depends. The pat answer. That's a little difficult to answer without the exact details. But generally, just if something is going wrong in a study with an animal, you can't just exclude them. You have to, especially in a GLP study, you have to explain what happened there. So, yeah, if it's a specific situation, I'd be happy to talk offline about that. But generally, in a GLP study or a safety study, you should be explaining what happened with that rather than just excluding.
Okay. And then I'm going to ask one more question, and then I also have Bill Bulkat's going to actually jump in, and there's a question that he's going to answer also. So I'll go ahead and ask this question: can safety studies be client-based?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean. What you mean by client base?
I'm assuming that they mean the study itself is tied to the client, I guess, in name and ownership, or is that always going to be the case?
I would interpret that as client-owned animals.
Oh, client-owned. They don't always have to be, but they can be.
Okay.
I think it varies, and Margetta, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, it really depends on the circumstances.
You just have a lot more variables, right? You guys with client-owned animals, right?
Yeah.
Animals from, a colony in a very controlled environment, which is typically the environment and the studies that you all conduct.
For sure, and especially if you're doing safety ones where it's really important, safety studies where it's really important to follow protocol. I mean, when we get pet owners in the mix, I mean, it's hard enough to get owners to do stuff for themselves, right? So, yeah, you definitely throw some variables. And I wanted to make one more comment, too, if I might, on the previous question about if an animal's falling out. I think also you look at study design on that. I know we do in humans, right, where we do like intent to treat and per protocol. So in other words, we can also run statistics on the per protocol and intent to treat populations, which means we're still keeping that animal or human that fell out in one data set, but we can also show if we remove them and analyze it both ways.
Awesome, thank you. Bill, I'll let you go ahead and jump in and answer the question that you had flagged on.
Which one was that?
I think it was one. I think it's going back to excipients.
Oh no, that question had been answered. Susan and Margetta did a good job. I didn't mean to flag that for me. I'm here as a bystander, just in case there's anything that comes across the NASC bow that I could chime in on. But you guys are doing a great job, so I don't have any meaningful input.
Well, in that case, I'm gonna move to another question. How would you recommend for new ingredients to the market to be utilized by formulators and brands?
How would we recommend to be utilized?
How would you recommend for new ingredients to the market to be utilized by formulators and brands? And I think with this one being kind of broad, maybe circling back to the case study that you guys did with those ingredients that you two were talking about in your study.
Yeah, so I think, and if I understand the question properly, I think it goes back to, understanding what you want to say about it and what you can say about it, both from a regulatory and a scientific perspective. So I think you want to be really clear as an ingredient supplier, exactly having substantiation and having clear regulatory framework for your ingredient is, I think, is the important part. And that's how I think you communicate to formulators and suppliers so that they know what indications it can be used for, what formulas and so the company providing that, I think, is important. And not all ingredient companies do that. And they leave it sometimes to the finished product people. And that's not a wrong thing to do, but you asked, and I think that's important for clarity there, to have that marketing stuff follow the ingredient, not just the finished products.
Excellent, thank you.
If I didn't answer the question appropriately, please make me elaborate.
Susan, this is Bill Bookhead. I'll just chime in to underpin what you said. There's really two governmental organizations that look at these types of things. One is FDA, the other is FTC. FDA considers what's the intended use and benefit of the product or the ingredient being looked at, and what pathway would that go down. If it's a nutritional ingredient, then the benefits have to be nutrition, nutritive value, aroma, or technical effect, like a preservative or an excipient. If the ingredient is for a health benefit, that's also an FDA question. You got to be careful. You're right. You can have a study that substantiates the benefit in dogs with osteoarthritis, but you might not be able to use that study because you're lapsing into approved drug territory and you don't want to get a warning letter from FDA. So your claims on the supplement side, if you will, limited to structure function. You can use studies like that, but you got to be careful for efficacy. The other regulatory agency in the US is the Federal Trade Commission, which looks at, are the claims that you make or representations that you make in terms of your claims and benefit statements, are they truthful? Can you back them up, right? So studies can be beneficial in those two areas, but companies really need to be familiar with, what are the limitations and considerations from both FDA and FTC and the impact on clinical studies. And, there's also potentially intellectual property considerations. So a number of considerations that Nutrisource helps companies think through, go through as a part of your process, right, Susan and Margetta?
Exactly. And thank you, Bill, for that detailed clarification. We appreciate that.
Thanks, Bill. Another question we have was, do you charge a flat rate for product or project or percentage? Do you offer being a business partner?
That's a question that our CEO would have to answer. Normally, we charge. We put together a scope of work based on custom client feedback. So we sit down with you. We have you fill out a questionnaire, and we will price the scope of work according to what you're looking for, and we'll work with you back and forth with that to get it right. Typically, it's a flat fee made in installments, but we sometimes do work on an hourly basis. We also offer general consulting agreements. A lot of companies, have multiple projects going on. They want to help develop their plan, their year plan, 3-year plan, 5-year plan, and we'll do the general consulting agreements under an hourly basis with sort of an upfront retainer. Now, as far as taking a piece in the product, I can't answer to that, but I can safely say, knowing Will, that he is always open to discussion, and so you can always ask.
Excellent. And we'll be advancing to a slide that'll have contact information with you guys at Nutrisource as well. I think with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I did want to mention that that registration is now open for the 2022 NASC annual conference, and that's going to be held June 7th through 9th in St. Louis, Missouri, and that's going to be at the Chase Park Royal Sonesta Hotel. This will be a live event, and we're glad of that. And we're putting together an agenda that you won't want to miss. So you can learn more about that and registration by visiting conference.nasc.cc.
And I'm sure Nutrisource will be at the meeting. So if you want to set up individual meetings with Nutrisource, when you're down there in St. Louis, you guys that's part networking is part of the benefit of the meeting. So, right,
Absolutely.
Susan?
Absolutely. We look forward to sitting down and talking to anybody who would like to meet us in person. And of course, you don't have to wait until then. We're happy to set up a call on Teams or Zoom or whatever. Name your poison there. Our business development director, Lauren Brown, will get in touch with you for any questions you may have if you want to sit down and speak with us.
Excellent. On behalf of NASC, I really want to thank all of you for joining us today and for your participation in today's webinar. And a really big thank you to Nutrisource for sharing this presentation with us. And also our special guest, Bill Bookout. Thank you, sir. Once again, today's webinar will be archived on the NASC website. You'll be able to view both the presentation deck and the video by visiting nasc.cc/webinars. And please feel free to share this presentation with anyone within or without the organization that you think could benefit from it. Again, thank you very much for joining us today, and everybody take care. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having us. Everyone take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.